The fork slipped from my fingers and clattered against the fine china plate, the same Wedgwood set I'd received as a wedding gift 47 years ago. The sound echoed through the dining room like a gunshot, and suddenly every face at the table turned toward me with that look. You know the one. It's that mixture of pity, embarrassment, it's barely concealed irritation that people reserve for the elderly when we dare to show our humanity. "Oh, Aunt Margaret," my niece Sarah said, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she dabbed at the small splash of gravy on her designer blouse. "Don't worry about it. At your age, these things happen. At my age," as if 71 was some kind of death sentence for basic motor skills, as if the slight tremor in my hands a side effect of the medication it's been taking since my heart surgery 6 months ago made me incapable of human dignity. "I'm fine," I said quietly, reaching for my napkin. But Sarah was already standing, swooping in like some benevolent savior. "Here, let me help you with that." She took the napkin from my hands before I could protest, dabbing at the tablecloth with theatrical efficiency. "Mom, maybe Aunt Margaret should use the plastic plates from now on. You know, the ones we use for the grandkids." My sister Linda Sarah's mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Sarah, that's not necessary. I'm just thinking practically," Sarah continued, her voice carrying that particular tone young people use when they think they're being reasonable while simultaneously being cruel. "I mean, we don't want any more accidents, do we? Especially with Grandma's good china. Grandma's good china." The china that had been mine long before Sarah was even born. The china that had graced every holiday dinner, every celebration, every milestone in my family for nearly 5 decades. Now reduced to a potential casualty of my apparent decline, I looked around the table at the faces of my family: Linda, her husband Robert, their son Michael, and of course Sarah. My brother James sat at the far end, avoiding eye contact as he always did when family tension arose. These were the people I'd helped raise, supported through countless crises, celebrated with during their victories. And now they were discussing me as if I were a fragile artifact that might crumble at any moment. "The china's fine," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Fine." Sarah laughed, a bright, dismissive sound that made my chest tighten. "Of course you are, Aunt Margaret. But you know what they say about prevention being better than cure." She turned to her mother with an exaggerated whisper that everyone could hear. "Maybe we should look into some of those assisted living brochures I saw at Dr. Peterson's office. Just for future reference." The room fell silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, another piece of my history that would undoubtedly be too much for me to handle someday. I felt something crack inside my chest, not my ribs or my sternum, but something deeper, something that had been bending under the weight of these small cruelties for months now. "I think," I said carefully, setting down my water glass with deliberate precision, "that perhaps I should go home." "Oh, Aunt Margaret, don't be like that," Sarah said, but there was no real concern in her voice. "We're just looking out for you. Someone has to, right? I mean, living alone in that big house at your age, it's not exactly safe, is it? That big house? The 3-bedroom colonial where I'd raised 2 children as a single mother after my husband died? A house where I'd hosted every family gathering. For the past 2 decades, it's the house that held every memory I had left of the people I'd loved most. Sarah, it was just another problem to be managed." I stood slowly, tusting more than usual, and gathered my purse. "Thank you for dinner, Linda. It was lovely." "Margaret, please don't go," Linda said, finally finding her voice. Sarah didn't mean, oh, I think she meant exactly what she said. I looked directly at my niece, taking in her perfectly contoured makeup, her expensive highlights, Her clothes that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. At 23, she had the confidence that comes from never having faced real hardship, never having been dismissed or diminished. And I understand completely. Sarah had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, but she recovered quickly. I just worry about you, Aunt Margaret. We all do. Maybe Uncle James could check on you more often. Or I don't need checking on. The words came out sharper than I intended, and I saw Sarah's eyes widen slightly. Good. Maybe it was time she learned that being old didn't mean being defenseless. I've been taking care of myself since before you were born, Sarah. I'll manage. I walked toward the door, my spine straight despite the arthritis. My steps measured despite the slight dizziness that sometimes came with my blood pressure medication. Behind me, I heard the murmur of voices, probably discussing how difficult I was becoming, how the evening had been awkward. Let them talk. I had more pressing concerns than their comfort. The drive home through the October darkness gave me time to think, though thinking was the last thing I wanted to do. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, steadier than they'd been at dinner. I noted with bitter irony. The tremor only seemed to appear when I was stressed, when I felt under scrutiny, when I was reminded of all the ways my body was betraying me. My house sat at the end of Maple Street like a loyal friend waiting for my return. The porch light I'd left uncast a warm glow over the garden I'd tended for 30 years, the garden that was apparently too much for me to handle, according to my well-meaning family. I sat in my car for a moment, looking at the life I'd built. The independence I'd fought so hard to maintain. The tremor in my hands had stopped completely. Inside, I made myself a cup of Tyrrell Grey. It's the same blend I'd been drinking since I was Sarah's age and settled into my reading chair. The house was quiet but not empty. It was filled with the presence of all the years I'd lived here, all the decisions I'd made, all the storms I'd weathered. The silence was peaceful, not lonely. There was a difference, though I doubted my family would understand that distinction. I pulled out my tabletone, other piece of evidence, against my supposed senility and began scrolling through my bank statements. It was a habit I'd developed since my heart surgery, a way of staying connected to the practical realities of my life. The numbers were reassuring. My pension, my Social Security, the inheritance from my husband, the insurance payout, and most importantly, the investment portfolio I'd been carefully building for the past 2 decades. I wasn't wealthy by anyone's standards, but I was comfortable. More than comfortable, actually. I could afford small luxuries, could help family members when they needed it, could maintain my independence without being a burden on anyone. It was something I'd worked hard to achieve, something I was proud of. The phone rang just as I was closing the tablet. Linda's name appeared on the screen, and I considered not answering. But old habits die hard, and I'd never been one to ignore family, even when family didn't show me the same courtesy. Hello. Linda, Margaret, I'm so sorry about tonight. Her voice was strained, tired. Sarah, she's going through a difficult time with school and money and, well, that's no excuse. She was out of line. Yes, she was. I didn't see any point in softening the truth. Linda sighed. She's young. She doesn't understand. She's 23. Linda, when I was 23, I understood plenty about respect and kindness. I paused, remembering those early years of widowhood, the struggles and the small victories. But you're right. She doesn't understand. The question is, what are you going to do about it? What do you mean? Are you going to continue making excuses for her behavior? Or are you going to help her learn how to treat people, less especially family, with basic human decency? The silence stretched between us. Finally, Linda said, "You know Sarah loves you, Margaret. We all do." Love isn't just a feeling, Linda. It's action. It's respect. Seeing someone as a whole person instead of a problem to be managed. Felt tears prick at my eyes, but my voice remained steady. Tonight, I didn't feel loved. I felt dismissed, diminished, reduced to my age and my medical conditions. Oh, Margaret, I'm going to bed now. Thank you for calling. I hung up before she could respond, before she could offer more apologies or explanations that wouldn't change anything. The damage was done, the words spoken, the message delivered. I was no longer the aunt who could be counted on to accept any treatment with gracious silence. The next morning brought the familiar routine that had sustained me through 40 years of independence. Coffee at 6, morning news, a light breakfast. Then the walk around the neighborhood that Dr. Peterson said was good for my heart. The October air was crisp, filled with the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves. I felt stronger with each step. Mrs. Chen from next door waved from her garden. Beautiful morning, isn't it, Margaret? Certainly is, I called back, surprised by how much I meant it. Despite everything, it was a beautiful morning. I was alive. I was mobile. I was mentally sharp. And I had choices to make about how I wanted to spend the rest of my life. The phone was ringing when I returned from my walk. This time it was James, my younger brother, and his voice carried the careful tone people use when they're about to deliver unwelcome news. Margaret, I heard about last night. Linda called me. Sure she did. I poured myself a second cup of coffee and settled at the kitchen table. And what did she say? That there was some tension at dinner? Or that Sarah was... Well, that she said some things. She called me senile, James. She suggested I use plastic plates and start looking at assisted living facilities. She treated me like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. I took a sip of coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. But I'm sure Linda's version was more diplomatic. James cleared his throat. She's concerned about you living alone, Margaret. We all are. Since the heart surgery, I've recovered beautifully. Dr. Peterson said so. Himself. My memory is fine. My judgment is sound and my independence is not negotiable. The words came out with more force than I'd intended, but I didn't apologize. I'm tired of everyone tiptoeing around me like I'm made of glass.
Nobody
Thinks you're made of glass, but you're not getting any younger. And that house is a lot for one person, James. I interrupted him with the tone I'd used when he was 8 years old and tracking mud through my kitchen. I love you dearly, but I won't have this conversation. Not today, not next week, not next year. When and if I need help, I'll ask for it. Until then, I expect to be treated like the competent adult I've been for the past 71 years. Another pause. Then, more gently. Okay, Margaret, I hear you, but you know we're here for you, right? When you're ready, I know, and I appreciate that. I really do. I did appreciate it, even if their concerns sometimes felt more like interference. But I need you to trust me to know my own mind and my own limitations. After James hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, looking out at the garden where late roses still bloomed despite the season. Trust. Such a simple word, such a complex concept. My family claimed to love me, but they didn't trust me. They saw my age, my recent health scare, my occasional moments of physical vulnerability, and they decided that wisdom and experience counted for nothing. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent the better part of 5 decades making difficult decisions, managing crises, solving problems. I'd raised 2 children alone after losing my husband to a heart attack when I was just 47. I'd put both kids through college on a secretary's salary and careful financial planning. I'd cared for my own aging parents until they died, navigated the healthcare system, dealt with insurance companies and lawyers and government bureaucrats. I'd survived cancer in my 50s, depression in my 60s, and a heart attack at 70. But, apparently, dropping a fork made all of that irrelevant. The days that followed fell into a pattern I was beginning to recognize. Phone calls from various family members, each one carefully casual, each one designed to check on my mental and physical state. Linda called to ask if I needed groceries. Michael called to see if I was managing okay after the dinner party. Even Robert, Linda's husband, called to ask if I needed help with yard work. They meant well, I told myself. They were trying to be helpful. But beneath each offer of assistance was the assumption that I couldn't handle my own life anymore. Each conversation left me feeling smaller, more fragile, more like the frail old woman they seemed determined. To see, it was Sarah who surprised me. She arrived on my doorstep the following Saturday morning without calling, which was unusual for her. She was always so careful about scheduling, so concerned with managing her time efficiently. Today she looked different, somehow younger, more vulnerable, less polished than she'd been at dinner. Double quotes. Hi, Aunt Margaret. I hope it's okay that I just stopped by. I studied her face, looking for signs of the condescension I'd grown used to. Instead, I saw something that looked almost like nervousness. Of course it's okay. Come in. She followed me to the kitchen, accepting my offer of coffee. With an eagerness that suggested she needed the caffeine, we sat at my small breakfast table, the same table where I'd helped her with homework when she was in elementary school, where I'd listened to her talk about boys and college plans and career dreams. I wanted to apologize, she said, not meeting my eyes. About last week? About the things I said? Mom told me I was out of line, and she was right. I waited. There was more coming. I could see it in the tension around her eyes, the way she kept fidgeting with her coffee cup. I'd been stressed about school, she continued. Senior year, you know? And job applications, and just everything feels so overwhelming sometimes. But that's not an excuse for how I treated you. No, it's not. I kept my voice gentle but didn't offer the automatic forgiveness she was probably expecting. You hurt me, Sarah. You made me feel like my age was something shameful, like I was a burden you all had to manage. Oh, she flinched. That wasn't my intention. Intentions matter, but impact matters more. I reached across the table and touched her hand. You're young and scared and dealing with pressures I probably can't fully understand. But I'm old and scared and dealing with pressures you definitely can't understand. We're both human, both struggling in our own ways. The difference is, I would never use your youth against you the way you used my age against me. Tears gathered. In her eyes, I know. You're right. I'm sorry, Aunt Margaret. Really, truly sorry. I squeezed her hand. I accept your apology. But I need you to understand something. Being old doesn't make me stupid or incompetent or fragile. It makes me experienced. It makes me someone who has survived decades of challenges that would probably break the person I was at your age. Nodded, wiping her eyes with her free hand. I know. I do know that, really. You've always been the strongest person in our family. I guess I've been so focused on my own problems that I forgot to see you as a person instead of just my elderly aunt. Was a good apology, better than I'd expected. There was real remorse in her voice, real understanding. I felt some of the hurt from the previous week begin to ease. Thank you for saying that, I said. It means a lot to me. We talked for another hour about safer subjects her classes, her part-time job at the campus bookstore, her plans for after graduation. She was studying business administration with a focus on nonprofit management, hoping to work for an organization that helped elderly people navigate healthcare and housing issues. The irony of that wasn't lost on either of us, and we even managed, to laugh about it. I guess I should practice treating elderly people with more respect, she said as she gathered her jacket to leave. It wouldn't hurt, I agreed, walking her to the door. And Sarah, next time you're feeling overwhelmed, you can talk to me about it? I may be old, but I remember what it was like to be young and scared about the future. She hugged me then, a real hug, not the careful, distant embrace I'd been receiving from family members since my surgery. I love you, Aunt Margaret. I'm sorry it took me so long to show it properly. After she left, I felt lighter somehow, as if a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted from my shoulders. Maybe my family could learn to see me differently. Maybe the dinner party incident had been a wake-up call for all of us. I was naive to think it would be that simple. The call came exactly 1 week later. On a Tuesday afternoon while I was reading in my garden, Sarah's name appeared on my phone screen, and I smiled as I answered, "Hello, dear. Our class is going." But the voice that greeted me wasn't the warm, apologetic young woman who had sat in my kitchen. This Sarah sounded rushed, stressed, almost frantic. "Aunt Margaret, hi, I'm so glad I caught you. Listen, I have a huge problem, and I was hoping, Well, I was wondering if you could help me." Something in her tone made me sit up straighter in my garden chair. "What kind of problem?" "It's my tuition for next semester." The words came out in a rush. There was a mix-up with my financial aid, and I owe the school $8,000 by Friday, or they won't let me register for classes. I could lose my whole senior year. I felt a cold sensation in my stomach, a mixture of disappointment and something that might have been anger. "I see. And you're calling me because I know you have money," she said, apparently forgetting the diplomatic approach she'd used during her apology visit. "I mean, everyone knows you're comfortable. And this is an emergency, Aunt Margaret. I've already asked Mom and Dad, but with Michael starting college next year, they just don't have it. Uncle James is having his own financial problems. You're my only option. My only option. Not my beloved aunt. Not the woman I respect and care about. Not even the family member I owe an apology for treating poorly. Just an option. A last resort. With a bank account. $8,000 is a significant amount of money, Sarah. I know. But I'll pay you back. I promise. Once I graduate and get a job, I'll pay you back with interest. Please, Aunt Margaret. I'm desperate here. Desperate enough to call the senile old woman with the shaky hands. Desperate enough to ask for help from the person she'd suggested should be looking at assisted living facilities." The irony was so sharp it nearly took my breath away. "You find out about this tuition problem?" I asked. "Yesterday?" "Well, officially yesterday. I knew there might be an issue with the financial aid, but I thought it would work itself out." Her voice took on a defensive edge. "I know. The timing isn't great, asking for money right after what happened at dinner last week, but this is important. This is my future we're talking about. Her future. It's the future that apparently mattered more than the dignity of the person she was asking to fund it. I need to think about this, Sarah. Think about it, Aunt Margaret. I just told you I have until Friday? That's 3 days. What's to think about?" The desperation in her voice was tinged with something that sounded like impatience, as if my hesitation was an inconvenience rather than a reasonable response to a significant financial request. "I need to think about it," I repeated, my voice steady despite the tumult in my chest. "I'll call you back." "When?" "Tonight." "Tomorrow, because I really need to know soon so I can figure out other options if I'll call you back. Sarah." I hung up before she could continue, before she could apply more pressure, before she could remind me again about her desperation and my apparently endless supply of money. My hands were shaking not from medication this time, but from a rage so pure and cold it surprised me with its intensity. I sat in my garden for a long time, watching the late afternoon light slant through the maple trees, listening to the sound of children playing in a yard several houses away. The normalcy of the world around me felt surreal given the conversation I'd just had. $8,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it wasn't insignificant either. I could afford it without hardship, could write the check and never miss the money. That wasn't the issue. The issue was that the same young woman who had called me senile, who had suggested I use plastic plates, who had treated me like a problem to be managed, was now asking me to solve her problems with my money. The issue was that her apology the week before had apparently been motivated not by genuine remorse, but by the knowledge that she might need something from me. The issue was that I was only valuable to my family when I was useful. I went inside and made myself dinner a simple meal of pasta and salad that I ate slowly, savoring each bite. Then I sat down at my computer and did something I hadn't done in months. I updated my will. It took me 3 hours to go through every line, every bequest, every consideration I'd made about how to distribute the assets I'd spent a lifetime accumulating. My house, my investments, my personal belongings, my savings, all of it carefully allocated based on love, need, and respect. When I was finished, I printed out the new document and set it aside. Then I made a list of phone numbers and started making calls. The first call was to my financial advisor, a woman named Patricia who had been helping me manage my investments for the past 15 years. We had a long conversation about liquid assets, about the current state of my portfolio, about options and opportunities I hadn't previously considered. The second call was to my lawyer, a man I'd known since my husband died who had helped me navigate the complex world of estate planning and asset protection. We talked about trusts and foundations, about charitable giving and tax implications. The third call was to Dr. Peterson's office, where I scheduled a comprehensive physical and cognitive assessment. If my family was going to question my mental competence, I wanted professional documentation of my capabilities. By the time I finished, it was nearly midnight. I felt exhausted but strangely exhilarated. It's the way I used to feel after making difficult but necessary decisions during my working years. I was taking control, not just of this situation with Sarah, but of my entire future. I slept better that night than I had in months. The next morning brought another call from Sarah. It's one even more frantic than the last. "Aunt Margaret, I've been waiting to hear from you. Did you think about what we discussed?" "I did. And can you help me? Because I only have 2 days left. And if I can't come up with the money, Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." I kept my voice calm, conversational. "When you came to see me last week, when you apologized for your behavior at dinner, were you already planning to ask me for money?" The silence stretched so long I thought the call might have been dropped. Finally, she said, "I don't understand what you mean." "Think you do. Think you knew about your tuition problem before you came to apologize. I think you realized you might need financial help from someone in the family. And you decided it would be smart to mend fences with the person most likely to have available funds. That's not how it was." Oh, God. But her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it? 'Cause the timing is rather coincidental, don't you think? You treat me with contempt at a family dinner, then show up a week later with a heartfelt apology, then call a week after that with a financial emergency that only I can solve. Aunt Margaret, you're being paranoid. I came to apologize because I felt bad about what I said, not because I wanted money from you." Paranoid. Another dismissive term, another way of suggesting that my perceptions couldn't be trusted. I felt the familiar fire of anger. but this time it was tempered with something colder, more calculating. "Perhaps I am being paranoid," I said. "Perhaps I'm also being senile and foolish and all the other things you think I am. But you know what? I'm not being, Sarah. I'm not being generous. The answer is no." "No? What do you mean? No?" "I mean, I won't be giving you $8,000. I won't be solving your tuition problem. You'll need to find other options. But, but you have the money. Everyone knows you have the money, and I'm family. I'm your niece. Yes, you are. And if you were anyone else's niece, if you had treated anyone else's elderly relative the way you've treated me, what would you think of them asking for financial help?" She was crying now, but it felt manufactured, performed. I said I was sorry. I apologized. "What more do you want from me? I want you to understand that respect isn't something you can turn on and off, depending on what you need from someone. I want you to realize that my age and my medical conditions don't make me less deserving of basic human dignity. I want you to see me as a person, not as a resource to be managed or exploited. I do see you as a person. Of course I do. No, Sarah, you see me as an obstacle when I don't behave the way you think elderly people should behave. And as a solution when you have problems you can't handle yourself. That's not seeing me as a person, seeing me as a function." The line went quiet except for the sound of her crying. I felt no satisfaction in her distress, but I felt no guilt either. This was a lesson that was long overdue. "I have to go," she finally said. "I need to figure out what to do." "I'm sure you will. You're a resourceful young woman, Sarah. Much more resourceful than you give yourself credit for." After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. I had just refused to help a family member in need, had just prioritized my own dignity over her education, had just chosen principle over family harmony. It should have felt wrong. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing I'd done in months. The phone started, ringing an hour later. First, Linda, her voice tight with accusation and disappointment. Then James, trying to play peacemaker. Then Robert, attempting to explain Sarah's perspective and pressure me to reconsider. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Shock that I would refuse to help family, suggestions that I was being petty or vindictive, reminders of how much the family had always been there for me. But none of them asked about my feelings. None of them acknowledged that Sarah had treated me poorly. None of them seemed to understand that respect couldn't be separated from love. That dignity wasn't a luxury I should be willing to give up for the sake of family peace. By evening, I was exhausted from explaining and defending my decision. I turned off my phone and spent the evening reading, trying to lose myself in someone else's story, someone else's problems. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was having breakfast when I heard a car in my driveway, and I looked out to see Sarah walking toward my front door. But this wasn't the confident young woman who usually strode through my house like she owned it. This Sarah moved slowly, her shoulders slumped, face showing signs of a sleepless night. I opened the door before she could knock. Double quotes. "Hello, Sarah. Hi, Aunt Margaret. I know you probably don't want to see me, but I needed to talk to you, face to face." I stepped aside to let her in, noting that she looked smaller somehow, younger and more vulnerable than I'd seen her since she was a child. "Would you like some coffee, please?" I sat at my kitchen table again, but the dynamic was completely different this time. She didn't fidget or avoid eye contact. Instead, she sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on my face. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about seeing you as a person instead of a function." She took a shaky breath. "And I realized you're right. I realized I've been treating you like a resource, like someone who existed to help me when I needed it, instead of someone with her own feelings and needs and dignity. I waited. This felt different from her previous apology, more genuine, but I'd been fooled before. "I want to tell you something," she continued. "Keiichi, and I want to tell you the truth this time because you deserve that." She looked down at her hands. "You were right about the timing. I did know about the tuition problem before I came to apologize last week. Not all the details, but I knew there was a problem with my financial aid, and I knew I might need help." The admission hit me harder than I'd expected, even though I'd known it was true. Hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way that speculation hadn't. "And yes, I thought about asking you for money even before I came to apologize. I thought about how I'd treated you at dinner, and I knew it was wrong, but I also knew I might need your help. So I came to apologize partly because I felt bad, but also because I thought it would make you more likely to help me later." She looked up at me then, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so ashamed of myself, Aunt Margaret. I'm ashamed that I treated you badly, and I'm ashamed that I tried to manipulate you into helping me. I'm ashamed that I only saw you as valuable when you could do something for me." This was it, I realized. This was the honest conversation we should have had weeks ago, before the dinner party, before the hurt feelings, before the financial crisis. This was what respect looked like, acknowledging the truth, even when it was ugly. "Thank you for telling me that," I said. "It couldn't have been easy to admit. It wasn't. Oh, but you were right. I can't just apologize for treating you badly and then turn around and ask you to solve my problems. That's not how relationships work. That's not how families should work." I reached across the table and took her hand. "No, it's not. But the fact that you can see that now, that you can acknowledge it, tells me something important about the person you're becoming. I don't know what to do about school," she said quietly. "I've applied for emergency loans, talked to the financial aid office, even looked into taking a semester off to work and save money. But I don't think any of it's going to work. I might lose my whole senior year because I was too proud to deal with this problem months ago, when I first knew there was an issue." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation, for hints that this confession was just another strategy to get what she wanted. Instead, I saw genuine remorse, genuine fear, and something that looked like growth. "Sarah, I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer. Okay? If I were just some wealthy stranger, if I had no obligation to you at all, what would you do about your tuition problem?" She considered the question seriously. "I'd find a way to handle it myself. I'd take out loans, get a second job, maybe take a gap year to earn money. I wouldn't expect a stranger to solve my problems for me. And why should family be different? Because, 'cause family helps each other?" 'Cause she said it like a question, as if she was no longer sure of the answer. "Family does help each other," I agreed. "But help built on manipulation and disrespect isn't really help. It's exploitation disguised as love." She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I know that now. I know I don't have the right to ask you for money, especially after how I've treated you. I know my problems aren't your responsibility." "They're not," I said gently. "But you are my niece, and despite everything, I do love you." Hope flickered in her eyes, and I held up a hand to stop her from speaking. "I love you, but I won't give you the money." The hope died, but she nodded. "I understand. I do, and I don't blame you. However," I continued, "I might be willing to loan you the money. Under very specific conditions." She looked up sharply. "What kind of conditions?" "First, this would be a formal loan with a written contract, payment schedule, and interest rate. You would sign legal documents, and you would be held accountable for repayment just like you would with a bank. She nodded. That's fair. Second, you would need to demonstrate that you've learned something from this experience. That means changing how you interact not just with me, but with all the older people in your life. I want to see evidence that you understand what respect looks like. What kind of evidence? I smiled. You're studying nonprofit management with a focus on elderly services, right? I want you to volunteer at the senior center downtown, 20 hours a week for the rest of the semester. I want you to learn what it's really like to be old in America, what challenges older people face, what strengths they have that younger people overlook. Her eyes widened. 20 hours a week. But I have classes and my job at the bookstore. Then you'll have to figure out how to manage your time. Consider it part of your education. I leaned back in my chair. Those are my conditions, Sarah. Take them or leave them. She was quiet for a long moment, processing what I'd said. I could see her weighing her options, calculating costs and benefits. Finally, she looked up at me with something that might have been respect. You're not making this easy for me. No, I'm not. Easy lessons don't stick. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my garden where the last of the autumn flowers were blooming. You know, when I was your age, I thought older people were just waiting to die. I thought they were irrelevant, that their experiences didn't matter because the world had moved on without them. I turned back to face her. Then I became one of them. And I learned that getting older doesn't make you less human, less valuable, less deserving of respect. It just makes you invisible to people who haven't learned that lesson yet. Sarah was crying again, but these tears looked different, less self-pity, more understanding. I've been one of those people, haven't I? Yes, you have. But you don't have to stay one of them. She wiped her face and stood up. I accept your conditions, all of them, the loan, the contract, the volunteer work, everything. Even if it means giving up your job at the bookstore. Even if it means less time for socializing and relaxing. Even then, she met my eyes steadily. I want to earn this, Aunt Margaret. I want to prove to you and to myself that I can be better than I've been. I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening of the anger and hurt I'd been carrying. This wasn't the entitled young woman who had called me senile. This was someone who was beginning to understand the weight of her words and actions. All right then, I'll call my lawyer today and have him draw up the paperwork. The loan will be for $8,000 at 3% interest, to be repaid over 2 years starting 6 months after your graduation. Relief flooded her face. Thank you, Aunt Margaret. Thank you so much. So much. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you've completed your volunteer hours and proven that you understand what this was really about. She nodded and gathered her jacket, moving toward the door. Then she stopped and turned back to me. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you doing this? After everything I said, everything I did, why are you still willing to help me? I considered the question, thinking about all the hurt and anger and disappointment of the past few weeks. Because, Sarah, beneath all the cruelty and manipulation, I still see glimpses of the little girl who used to sit in my kitchen and tell me about her dreams. Because I believe people can change if they're willing to do the work. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst impulses. She started crying again, but she was smiling too. I love you, Aunt Margaret. I'm going to show you that your faith in me isn't misplaced. After she left, I called my lawyer and explained the situation. Kay was amused by my conditions, but agreed to draw up the loan documents. Then I called the senior center and spoke to the volunteer coordinator, a woman named Helen, who was delighted to hear that a college student wanted to spend significant time working with their residents. We have so many older adults who rarely get visitors, Helen told me. Having a young person around who actually wants to spend time with them. It's exactly what we need. Over the next few days, I watched my family process the news of my loan to Sarah. The reactions were mixed. Was relieved that I'd agreed to help, but concerned about the conditions I'd imposed. James thought I was being too harsh. Robert suggested that families shouldn't involve legal contracts and interest rates. But it was Michael, Linda's son and Sarah's younger brother, who surprised me the most. He called me directly, something he rarely did. "Aunt Margaret, it's Michael. I wanted to talk to you about what happened with Sarah." "What about it, dear? I think you did the right thing." His voice was serious, more mature than I'd heard from him before. "I mean, I know everyone's saying you're being too hard on her, but I was at that dinner too. I heard what she said to you." I hadn't realized Michael had been paying attention. He was usually so quiet during family gatherings, so focused on his phone or his food. "And what did you think about what she said?" "I thought it was cruel, Kate, and I thought it was weird, because you're like the smartest person in our family. You're the one who always remembers everyone's birthday, who knows all the family history, who gives the best advice. Calling you senile was just wrong." I felt tears prick at my eyes. Sometimes wisdom came from the most unexpected sources. "You for saying that, Michael. It means more than you know. I wanted you to know that not everyone in the family thinks you're being unreasonable. Some of us think Sarah needed to learn this lesson." After that conversation, I felt more confident in my decision. I also felt something I hadn't experienced in months: respect from a family member who saw me as I really was, not as an aging problem to be managed. The next few weeks brought regular updates from Sarah about her volunteer work. She called every few days to tell me about the people she was meeting, the stories she was hearing, the challenges she was witnessing. Her voice changed during these conversations, becoming less self-centered, more thoughtful. "There's this woman named Mrs. Patterson," she told me during one call. "She's 86 and has Parkinson's disease. Her hands shake all the time. And she has trouble eating without spilling. But Aunt Margaret, she's a retired engineer who worked on the space program. She helped design parts of the Apollo missions. Some of the staff treat her like she's just this confused old lady because she needs help with basic tasks." I smiled. "And how does that make you feel?" "Angry and ashamed, because I realize I've been doing the same thing to you, focusing on the tremor in your hands instead of seeing all the incredible things you've done with your life." Tell me about some of the others. There's Mr. Chun. He's 92 and still sharp as a tack. He was a professor of mathematics, and he's been teaching me calculus during my lunch breaks. And Mrs. Rodriguez, who raised 7 children as a single mother and now knits blankets for the homeless shelter. And Mr. Thompson, who was a jazz musician and still plays piano every day even though his arthritis makes it painful. With each story, I could hear Sarah's understanding deepening. She was learning what I'd tried to tell her weeks ago, that aging doesn't erase a person's history, intelligence, or value. It just makes them easier to dismiss by people who can't see past the surface. "I've been thinking," she said during one of our conversations, "about my major, about what I want to do after graduation. Thought I wanted to work for a big nonprofit, something prestigious with a good salary. But spending time at the senior center, I think I want to do something that actually helps older adults get the respect and services they deserve. That sounds like meaningful work." "It is, and Aunt Margaret, I understand now why you made volunteering part of the loan agreement. This isn't punishment, it's education." 3 months later, Sarah came to my house for Sunday dinner. It was the first family gathering I'd hosted since the disastrous evening that had started this whole journey, and I was nervous about how it would go. But the young woman who sat at my table was different from the one who had called me senile months earlier. She helped serve dinner without being asked, engaged respectfully with every family member. And when my hand trembled slightly while cutting my meat, she didn't comment or rush to help. She simply continued our conversation as if nothing had. It happened. "How are your classes going?" Linda asked her. "Really well. I'm writing my senior thesis on ageism in healthcare, actually. All the research I've been doing at the senior center has given me amazing material." She looked at me across the table. "I'm planning to dedicate it to Aunt Margaret, who taught me that wisdom comes with experience, not in spite of it." I felt my eyes fill with tears, but they were good tears this time. After dinner, as the family was preparing to leave, Sarah approached me privately. "I have something for you," she said, pulling an envelope from her purse. "It's the first payment on my loan. I know it's not due for another 3 months, but I wanted to start paying you back early." I opened the envelope to find a check for $500 more than the required monthly payment would be. "Sarah, this is too much." "No, it's not. It's what I can afford to pay without putting myself in a difficult position, which means it's what I should pay." She smiled. "You taught me that being responsible means doing what you can, not just what you have to. Where did you get the money?" "I thought you had to quit your job at the bookstore to volunteer enough hours." "I did. But I started tutoring other students in business classes, and I pick up catering shifts on weekends. It's actually more money than I was making at the bookstore, and the schedule is more flexible." I stared at the check, amazed not by the amount but by what it represented. Sarah hadn't just learned to treat older people with respect for her own choices and challenges. "I'm proud of you," I said, and meant it completely. "I'm proud of me too. And it's because you didn't let me get away with being less than I could be." 6 months later, I attended Sarah's graduation ceremony. She had finished her thesis on ageism in healthcare, which received the Departmental Award for Outstanding Research. She had completed over 300 volunteer hours at the senior center, becoming such a valued member of their team that they offered her a part-time job. And she had made every loan payment on time, often paying more than required. But more importantly, she had changed. The entitled young woman who had treated my age as a disability had become someone who saw older adults as whole people with rich histories and valuable perspectives. The transformation wasn't complete, growth never is, but it was real and profound as we stood together after the ceremony. Watching families celebrate their graduates, Sarah said something that surprised me. "I've been thinking about something you said months ago, about how being old doesn't make you less human, just invisible to people who haven't learned that lesson yet. What about it?" "I think that's true about more than just age. I think we make people invisible whenever we reduce them to one characteristic: their age, their disability, their financial situation, their race, whatever. We stop seeing them as complex human beings and start seeing them as problems or resources or obstacles." I nodded. "It's a very wise observation. I don't want to be someone who makes people invisible anymore. At work, in my personal relationships, anywhere. I want to see people as they really are, not as what I think they should be or what I need them to be." Looking at Hurley saw a young woman who had grown not just older but wiser, who had learned that respect isn't earned through usefulness but given through recognition of shared humanity, who understood that dignity isn't a luxury but a necessity. "I think you will," I told her. "I think you already are." A year later, I received an unexpected call from Helen at the senior center. "Margaret, I have some news that I think will interest you. Sarah has been promoted to assistant director of our volunteer program. She's implementing some remarkable initiatives to combat ageism in the community." "What kind of initiatives?" "Intergenerational programs, advocacy training, community education about the value of older adults." But the most impressive thing is how she talks to our residents. She doesn't talk down to them or around them. She talks with them as equals. It's rare to see that kind of respect from someone her age. I smiled, remembering the angry, dismissive young woman who had sat at my dinner table 18 months earlier. She's learned some important lessons. She told me you were instrumental in that learning process. She said you saved her from becoming someone she wouldn't have been able to live with. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Sarah had apologized, where she had agreed to my conditions, where she had paid her first loan, installment and reflected on the journey we'd all taken, my family still worried about. Me sometimes still offered help that felt more like interference. But something fundamental had shifted in how they saw me. Sarah's transformation had rippled outward, affecting how other family members interacted with me. I was no longer just the elderly aunt to be managed. I was Margaret, a person with opinions and capabilities and the right to make my own decisions. The tremor in my hands had largely disappeared once I'd regained control over my life. Dr. Peterson said it had probably been stress-related all along, exacerbated by feeling powerless and diminished. With my confidence restored, my body had followed suit. I finished paying off my house that year, vested the remainder of my assets in a trust that would fund scholarships for students studying geriatric care. Kara started volunteering at the senior center myself, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to, because I had learned that wisdom shared is wisdom multiplied. Sarah paid off her loan 6 months early. When she brought me the final payment, she also brought a letter of thanks that I keep in my jewelry box next to my wedding ring and my children's baby pictures. In it, she wrote, "You taught me that love without respect is just manipulation disguised as affection. You showed me that true family means seeing each other clearly, not just fondly. Thank you for refusing to let me be less than I could be, even when being less would have been easier for both of us." The letter reminded me of something I'd learned during those difficult months. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to hold them accountable for their worst impulses. That dignity isn't something you lose with age, it's something you fight for every day. It's in every interaction. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it's the people who love you will help you fight for it instead of asking you to surrender it for the sake of convenience. I'm 73 now, and my family still worries about me. But their worry looks different than it did 2 years ago. Instead of assuming I can't handle challenges, they ask how they can support me in handling them myself. Instead of seeing my age as a limitation, they see it as evidence of my survival. Skills. Sarah visits every Sunday for dinner. But now we eat off the good china, my good china, without anyone suggesting plastic alternatives. Her hands shake sometimes too, when she's stressed or tired, and neither of us comments on it. We've both learned that trembling hands can still accomplish extraordinary things. Last month, she was offered a position as Director of Senior Services for the entire county. She asked my advice before accepting, treating me not as a burden to be managed, but as a mentor whose experience had value. "Do you think I'm ready for that kind of responsibility?" she asked. I looked at the confident, compassionate young woman sitting across from me and smiled. "I think you've been ready since the day you realized that respect isn't conditional on convenience." She accepted the position, and I couldn't be prouder. Not because she succeeded, but because she earned her success by learning to see people, all people, regardless of age, as worthy of dignity and respect. The china never did get broken. By the way, it sits in my cabinet, as beautiful and functional as ever, waiting for the next family dinner, the next celebration, the next moment when we gather to remind each other that we are more than our limitations, more than our fears, more than the sum of our weaknesses. We are family. And family, when it works the way it should, sees each other clearly and loves each other anyway. Now that you've heard my story, Wonder, have you ever been dismissed or underestimated by your own family, only for them to come back when they needed something? Or perhaps you've seen love turn conditional the moment money was involved. There's something particularly painful about being reduced to your usefulness by the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. When Sarah called me senile at that dinner table, she wasn't just commenting on my age, I was telling me that my worth as a person had diminished along with my physical capabilities. When she asked for tuition money a week later, she was confirming that I was only valuable when I could solve her problems. But here's what I learned through that difficult time. Dignity isn't something other people give you. It's something you claim for yourself every day, in every interaction. It's the choice to demand respect even when it would be easier to accept dismissal. It's the courage to say no when yes would be more convenient for everyone else. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this message of strength has traveled. Whether you're in New York or Los Angeles, London or Sydney, Toronto or anywhere in between, I hope my story reminds you that getting older isn't the end of your power. Sometimes it's where you finally learn how to use it. Getting older doesn't make you less human. It makes you more experienced in the art of being human. And that experience, that hard-won wisdom, that deep understanding of what really matters, that's not something to apologize for. That's something to celebrate, protect, and share with the people brave enough to listen. The real fight isn't against aging. It's against a world that wants to make us invisible because of our age. Kana, that's a fight worth having, no matter how our hands might tremble while we're having it.